Hi, boys and girls, and moms and dads. It's me, Pastor Carol, and I'm just so glad that you joined me today for this special story. You know, Easter is a whole lot of fun, and we celebrate and we do fun things with Easter Bunny, and we do fun things with Easter eggs, and all those different things that we like to do, and the candy. But today I want to tell you a special story. And I'm going to use something a little different to do this. Maybe you've seen this before, maybe you haven't. But they're called resurrection eggs. And I have here a container that has eggs in it. Now they're plastic eggs, not real eggs. But in each one there is something different that goes along with the Easter story that comes from the Bible. And so today that's what we want to focus on, is that Easter story from the Bible. So let's get started, shall we? We're going to open our book, and we're going to open number 1, the first egg. And in this egg, we find a little donkey. A little donkey. Now, I wonder why that little donkey would be in there. Do you know that part of the Easter story? If not, let me just tell you real quickly. When Jesus was here on earth, he was coming into the city of Jerusalem one day, and people were shouting and praising his name, and we call that Palm Sunday. And as he did, he had a little donkey to ride on. And they were throwing their coats and their palm branches down on the ground, treating him like a king. Wasn't that wonderful? But unfortunately, it didn't stay that way. But that's what the little donkey represents, is Jesus riding into Jerusalem on that very special day. Let's set the little donkey over here and see what we have next. We go to egg number 2. In egg number 2, we find some silver coins. Look at this, some money. Why do you think we would find money in an egg? What has that got to do with it? Well, there was a man named Judas that he was one of Jesus's disciples, one of his followers, but he didn't exactly follow through on what he should do. And he was tempted to turn Jesus into the authorities. The Bible tells us for 30 pieces of silver, he told them where Jesus was, so that they could go arrest him in the garden one day. And so that's what the 30 pieces of silver have to do with the Easter story. Judas betrayed Jesus and who he was. So let's go on and see what we have in egg number 3. This is going to be another part of that week, that Holy Week, the Easter story about Jesus. In this one, we find a little cup, a little silver cup. Now, we all know what we do with a cup. We drink from it, right? Well, this cup represents what a lot of us know as the Last Supper. When Jesus gathered with his disciples, with his dear friends, and they had a meal together, and he took the cup and he filled it with the wine, with the juice, and they had a special celebration. And he kind of told them that something was going to happen to him. He had been trying to tell them about him having to go to the cross. But they didn't always understand. You know, sometimes we don't always understand those clues and those hints. But he said, this is the cup of my covenant with you, my blood that's going to be shed for you. So that's what the little cup represents, that Last Supper. We'll set it over here to the side. Let's go on to number 4. In number 4, we find a little praying hands. Little praying hands. Do you know why that might be in there? Well, let me tell you if you don't. When Jesus was going through these days, it was very hard for him. He knew what was coming. And he loved his Father. He loved God so much that he came down to do a very difficult job. But he was in the garden and he was praying. So these praying hands represent Jesus praying in the garden. And at one time, he even told God, in his prayers, he said, "Oh, Father, if this can go another way, if this can pass away from me, let it be, but I'll do what you want me to do." He was praying very hard. So that's why we have the praying hands. Let's go on to number 5. In number 5, we find a little piece of leather, like a little strap. What do we make out of leather? We make belts and shoes and purses and horse saddles. We make all kind of things out of leather. Back at that time in Jesus' day, a lot of things that were made out of leather were called whips. And they were used to punish criminals, to punish those who had done bad. It was like getting a very bad spanking. It was really hard and it would really hurt the people. So this leather reminds us that Jesus was actually beaten. He was beaten. He was hurt because of how much he loves us. He was willing to sacrifice himself for us. And he took our beating when it comes to the things that we do wrong. So this little piece of leather is like a strap. And that's what it reminds us of, what Jesus did for us, that he took that beating for us. Let's see what we have next. In the next egg, in number 6, we have a crown. It's actually called a crown of thorns. One of the things that they did to Jesus after he was arrested was take these thorny branches and they made them into a circle and they made a crown out of it and they put it on his head. Now we know that a king wears a crown, a queen wears a crown, but those are beautiful crowns made with beautiful gold and silver and diamonds and rubies. This wasn't that kind of a crown. This crown was made of a sticker bush that had big thorns on it. And they took it and they pushed it down on his head. But that was just another thing they were mocking Jesus about. Saying, "Oh, here you are saying you're the king of the Jews. That's who your people say you are." And they were just mocking him. But remember, this is all leading up to the fact that God loves us so much. Jesus came to die for us. He was willing to do anything so that we can go to heaven to be with him. Let's go on to the next one. In the next egg, we find a cross. I'm going to hold that right there. Now, I don't know if you can see it on the picture or not, but this cross is made of nails. What do we do with nails? We build things, right? We build houses, we build furniture, we build all kind of things with nails. And some are small and some are very big. But this little cross is made with nails. And that reminds us that Jesus was nailed to a cross. And it was not a pretty sight. It was not a pleasant thing. Once again, it was at a time when that's how they would punish criminals who had done bad things. Jesus hadn't done anything bad, but he was still nailed to a cross. He was willing to give up his life because of how much he loves you and how much he loves me. So when we see these little nails, or when you see any nails, remember that's what they used to hang Jesus on a cross because of how much he loves you. Let's go on to the next one. And in the next egg, get it out here, we find a little dice. It's a little dice. We use dice to play games, don't we? Sometimes we play games where we move around a board. You know, the dice lets us count how many squares to go. But a dice is used also in what we call gambling. Now, sometimes that can get people into trouble if they start gambling and they lose their money and that kind of thing. Back in Jesus' day, when he was hanging on that cross, there were some soldiers that were standing around. And they had taken Jesus' beautiful robe that he had worn. And they had taken it off of him. And they all wanted it. And so they were trying to decide who was going to get it, because they didn't want to tear it up. They didn't want to rip it. And so it says they were casting lots, or in a way they were rolling a dice to see who was going to get Jesus' robe. Now I'm sure it didn't look like this, like our dice today, but you get the idea. It was the same system. But they were doing it because they wanted that robe that Jesus wore. It was just another way of mocking him and making fun of him when he was hanging on that cross. Let's see what's in this pretty purple one. In number 9. Oh, in here. Can you see this? It's a spear. A spear. Have you ever thrown a spear? It has a very sharp end on it, and it can hurt really bad. Sometimes people would go hunting with a spear. They still do. They'll take it, and it's on a long stick, and they'll throw it at whatever they want, or maybe they do it for target practice, just for fun. But the soldiers that stood around Jesus when he was hanging on the cross, they had spears with them. And one of the Roman guards, one of the ones hanging there, he took his spear and he pushed it into Jesus' side. He did it, he was trying to make sure that Jesus was either dying or that he would die. And he pushed it in to Jesus' side. Jesus had already been beaten. He had a crown of thorns on his head. All of these horrible things that had happened. And then he used the spear on him. So when we see a spear like this, or maybe if you're watching a show on TV, maybe that spear can remind you again of what Jesus went through for you. All right, let's see what's in the next one. Whoops, it popped open. In this one, we have a piece of cloth. A piece of white material, white on white. That might not be real easy to see. But it's a white piece of cloth. Now, when someone dies today and they have a funeral, they are buried in a grave. And, you know, sometimes we go to a funeral when we can, and we love on the family, and we tell them how sorry we are that their loved one passed away. When Jesus died, it was a little bit different. When he died on the cross that day, some men came and they took his body down. And as was their custom at that time, they would take long pieces of material and they would wrap the body with it. And they would lay it in a tomb. You know, Jesus didn't even have a tomb. There was another man named Joseph of Arimathea who owned a nice one. And he said, you know what? You can bury Jesus in my tomb. I'll give it to him. And so that's where they took him to bury him. But while they were there, they wrapped him in this material, and they laid him out kind of on a rock bed. And then they actually covered his face with a square of material. That's just how they did it back then. That was their custom of doing it. So that piece of material reminds us of how Jesus was buried in that tomb. And he was wrapped with that cloth. Let's see what we have next. Oh, can you see this? It's a rock. It's a rock. Why do you think we would have a rock in one of our eggs? What do you think that might stand for? Well, let me tell you if you don't know. The tomb that Jesus was buried in was like a hollowed out little cave. It had an opening, a doorway that you went in, and the inside was hollowed out. I don't know exactly how big it was, but I'm imagining it might just be the size of a bedroom, okay? Big enough that there was like a rock slab, a rock table where his body would have been laid on. But then they came back And they took a big rock, big, much bigger than this. And it says they put it in front of the doorway. They sealed it off. They didn't want anyone going in to bother the body of Jesus. The Romans actually didn't want anybody going in with Jesus' disciples and stealing his body. Because Jesus had told them, you can kill me, you can bury me, but I will come back to life. And they were afraid that if Jesus' friends went in there, they would steal his body and bring him out. And then they could say, see, he told you he would come back to life. And so they put this huge big rock in front of it. And they stood guards next to it so that no one could get in and disturb that body. So that's what the rock reminds us of. Now I have one egg left, one very special one. So let's see what's in it. There's nothing in it. Nothing. Did we forget something? Did I forget to put in the item that was supposed to be in there? No, I didn't forget. You see, this egg is empty, and this is the most important one of all. This egg is empty because that's how the tomb was come Easter morning. What we celebrate is Easter Sunday. Jesus rose from the dead. He was no longer in there. He was brought back to life. God brought him back to life. And he lived and he walked with his friends and he talked to the disciples. He talked to the women who came to the tomb. They were coming there to put spices and ointment on his body, and he wasn't there. The tomb was empty because Jesus rose again, just like he said he would. There were no tricks. It wasn't his friends that came and stole his body like the Roman guards were afraid. But the stone was rolled away. Jesus came back to life, and he walked out of there. He walked on earth with his friends, and then sometime later, he went back to heaven to be with his heavenly Father. And that's where he is today. And for those of us that know the story of Jesus and what he did for us, and we accept him into our hearts and our lives, we will go there someday to be with him. That's my prayer for you, that you believe that Jesus died, he was buried, and he rose again, because then we can all go to heaven together. I pray that you have a wonderful Easter, and God bless each one of you.